Hi, this is Dr. Carl Goldkamp. If you're interested in learning about the ketogenic diet like I was, to save my own life, then this is probably the podcast for you. 8 years ago, I knew nothing about it. 6 years ago, it saved my life. 3 years ago, I started researching and talking with some of the authorities in the field and attending medical conferences about this to understand why and how keto so dramatically changed my and my wife's Judy's lives. The purpose of this podcast is to share our journey of discoveries with you and understanding how keto is so effective in improving so many different conditions, from obesity, epilepsy, diabetes, infertility, MS, Alzheimer's, heart disease, to name a few. So take a step away from all the hype you've probably heard and roll up your sleeves with me and join me weekly to explore this living miracle that anyone can access. We'll talk science, we'll talk food. We'll explore its history and evolution to today, which is that the sheer wonder of the ketogenic way of eating has changed untold number of lives, unlike anything before it. And in case I forget to mention it, please join our Facebook group, Keto Naturopath. Hi, this is Dr. Carl Goldkamp, and welcome back to another episode of the Keto Naturopath. There's been a little break, and that little break from my last podcast was basically due to I had no voice. I got a throat cold, and it was a terrible experience. I'll leave out the experience and just say that it took my voice with it for the better part of 10 days. But that's back, and swallowing's back, so life is back. Today, what I want to do is go over some concepts that I had covered in talking with Dr. Bocchiocchio, Dr. Ben. And Dr. Ben is a 2 PhD MS masters, and he's the one that came up with the high intensity training, HIT. HIT is kind of a generic for anything that's high intensity, so it's a little bit of a general misnomer. So to be very specific about it, the HIT that he came up with, now we're talking about the mid-70s, I think 74 specifically, he was the generator of, and I don't know if you call exercise an inventor of, but he's the first one to put the research behind this and understanding how profound this was for so many situations. We're not just talking about bodybuilding, but we're talking about, yes, certainly people working on their bodies, people working on their metabolism. So for cardiac patients, diabetes, congestive heart failure, a lot of number of these things. And for those who had some sort of functional goal in mind of competition, you name it. So he started his various gyms, and he was in the era of when Nautilus was just getting started. So he was working with all those thinkers. But one of the things that I think is really important to get out of the way in the beginning of talking about him is that he was the first that started. I'm repeating myself a little bit, but it's really important that he was the one that started this concept of slow movement, high intensity exercise. So little old ladies, little old men, young people, depending, when you talk about intensity, it's a relative word to that person and their ability to create that. So for some, it might be a lifting a pound over their head. And then he has specific exercises, specific in the sense that it covers certain areas of the body. So in other words, they would be a chest, what they call flies. It would be for the back, a row. It would be the squats. It would be a deadlift. It would be a leg press or a leg exertion. It would be hams, which is a leg flex. And you have your biceps and you have your triceps. And if you want, there's a couple of ab exercises in there too. So that part's not new at all. I mean, so you can do it on equipment. You can even do it with bands, the elastic bands at home. In fact, my wife and I just did our first session together, and it is exhausting. I'm almost sleepy tired now from doing that. So it can be done under a number of situations. It's not that, it's great if you have somebody there to push you a little bit so you make sure you get to that edge. And that edge is very important. That threshold of working at that threshold of exertion is very important. So the amount is not important at all. It's all relative to the person. And it has profound metabolic changes. Most of us that ever went to the gym or still go to the gym don't really go for metabolic changes. That's not what we think. If I stood by that door with a microphone and saying, "Excuse me, ma'am, why did you just come by to the gym this morning? Or what's your intention of being in the gym? What do you want to achieve today? What do you want to achieve with all your experience collectively at the end of the year by going to the gym?" They might say stay fit. That's as sophisticated as it's going to be. Mostly it's about firming up their muscles. And of course, some are there to be bodybuilders. And that's it. I think I just covered 99% of the people. I doubt anybody's going to go to any sort of metabolic depth. Okay, then. So I had a nearly 2-hour conversation with Dr. Ben yesterday. And it was fascinating, but there's a few things I think that would be worth sort of getting out of the way as general background, just like I do with the prequels for other speakers. And that is that he has a great book out there. First was, he's the first of the slow, high-intensity training. He taught this. One of his students is Ken Hutchins. And so Ken Hutchins. And so Ken Hutchins actually came out and coined the term, slow motion, even though he was taught it by somebody else, did famously with that term. He in turn influenced Doug McDuff, who is an MD ER doc, came out with a book called Body by Science, which is basically talking about Doug McDuff has 5 specific exercises. I've then called them for me. My wife used to follow his prescription. We called it the Fab 5. And those are 5 exercises that you do slowly to a count of 10 down and a count of 10 up. Just slowly was the key. But he also said, for a count of 10. And now working and talking with Dr. Ben, I see the point and the purpose behind that. And that is that kind of detail and understanding. So now I understand the threshold that I have to achieve. And so the threshold may not come to me in 10. It may come to me in 3. It may come to me longer. But for it to be a high intensity exercise, this is now per Dr. Ben, is that you should only be able to do 3 or 4 reps of the aforementioned exercises and be exhausted, hit failure. That means you spent your glycogen source on the muscles that you were using then. So 40 to 60 seconds, that's in essence the definition of a high intensity. You're done and you're spent. So when people say, I do high intensity training for 40 minutes, well, that's impossible actually. That's impossible. If you did Dr. Ben's, let's say it's 7 exercises, and they're all to that expiration of 40 to 90 seconds, your total exercise time would be about 14 minutes, between 11 and 14 minutes. So when people say, I always work high intensity, when I go to the gym for an hour and a half, say, well, no, it's not high intensity. You do work out, and I don't doubt it. It's not hard for you, but that's not high intensity. So there's a certain threshold in which you actually have to trigger adrenaline, and hitting those particular peaks, it really stimulated a lot of hormonal triggers. Human growth hormone, for one, growth hormone in general, which is really the same thing. Your insulin gets more sensitized. You actually start producing more muscle tissue, i.e. mitochondria. And when you start doing that, you're creating more receptors for insulin. You have more receptors as opposed to few receptors. So muscle mass is a determining factor of insulin sensitivity and therefore overall health. And so as a single factor for overall health in terms of insulin sensitivity and obviously blood glucose control, it's muscle. It's muscle. The other part is low carb. So Dr. Ben clearly earned his PhDs. What I mean is he's very knowledgeable in these 2 aspects. And he picked up long ago, as we'll discuss on the next podcast you'll be listening to, is that when he realized, how profound this was, putting these 2 together. So it wasn't just one, it wasn't just the other. So I'm speaking to you, on this Keto Naturopath podcast because you're interested in keto. Well, why? And I would say, well, why are you interested in keto? Probably 80% of you are listening and interested in keto because of weight loss. And beyond that, you're interested in all the other facts that it some of the hormones we've talked about, some of the metabolites we've talked about, certainly some of the people we've interviewed, and you realize, wow, this is a big deal. This goes way beyond just weight loss. But if it wasn't for weight loss being so profoundly achievable, and I'd say ... easy or easier than any other way to do it, you probably wouldn't even know the word keto out there. And now it's keto everything. Soon they'll have probably keto wallpaper, keto paint. It just put keto in front of it and will sell. The problem is now there's so much disinformation, it's hard to slug through and find out what's genuine and wholesome and something you can do. So that's the reason for this podcast. So I hope you think, at least after this podcast, and certainly after the one in listening to Dr. Ben, is that there's a whole other component that you can add to this that is, and he has a whole program, and he has a great book out there, and I'm going to post these. I'll post the links to this on his on that particular podcast, and I hope you do get those things. And I'll post some videos of him training other people doing this. It's a lot simpler than you think. It's just a lot more uncomfortable than you think. And that is the word that is, so why people don't do this? Well, you can say, well, they didn't know to do this. But there's a lot of people that just don't want to get uncomfortable. So for instance, let's go back to the gym. And I'm standing by the door and I'm asking these people why they're coming in and what do they expect to get out of the gym. If I was to sort of stay there for a couple hours and sort of watch what these particular people do, most people don't get that uncomfortable. They'll go over to the cardiovascular machines. Maybe they'll be on the elliptical for a while and maybe they'll do some weights, but nothing's a real push. Nothing's really all that hard. Maybe might be 1 rep out of 3 sets of 10 that, but there's a concept about threshold. All that work doesn't get to a certain threshold. And that threshold of stimulating adrenaline, norepinephrine and epinephrine and others, but mostly you'll feel that adrenaline rush and you'll feel that it has to be a do or die. It has to be a fight or flight feeling. And that's an uncomfortable feeling to be able to hold. So first you recognize it, you get to the place of being able to achieve that for you. And then and there's a degree of fear that comes up for you, by the way, when you feel that. It should. That's what adrenaline's about. The bear's in the woods and you're going to run, and you're going to run like you've never run before. But suddenly you now have access to energy you never had before. That's what adrenaline does. It opens the doors. And by opening the doors, you have access to muscle use you didn't have before you got to that threshold. So that threshold is really important. The concept of that threshold, which is both humorous and to the point, Dr. Ben gives. He says, there was a man that was really serious about trying to cut down on smoking. And he used to smoke, 4 cigarettes at once. And so he cut back to 2 cigarettes at once. And he asked the doctor, he said, no, I've really, did a lot of work and I'm now only smoking 2 cigarettes at once. Well, obviously that's going to make no difference. There's the effort, but he didn't reach threshold to make a difference and decrease risk of cancer and cardiovascular disease with smoking cigarettes is really 0. So there's a point of you went from 4 to 2. How much of a difference that's going to make? Probably none at all, because you're still smoking. So you have to stop smoking in that particular case to reach that particular threshold we're talking about. So too it is with exercise. But if you could think that maybe you needed to be guided through this once or twice, that actually is something you can do by yourself, because it's not dangerous when you see how some of these are. They're pretty traditional exercises, and you can even do them with bands. Hard to do one for hams with bands. Haven't figured that one out, but the concept is there, and you can get your set going. That to think that you could do something so profound as increasing your insulin sensitivity. If you had elevated glucose, you'd be dropping your glucose. You'd be building muscle mass, without a doubt, which means you're increasing your number of insulin receptors. You're increasing your human growth hormones, which is responsible in part for the increase in the muscle mass, but it also is a hormone that you could say it's a hormone of youth. So it slows down aging. So that's why when you see those who work out, just generally speaking, they'll get a little bit of bang, these people that I talked about that are coming into the gym that I'm following around. as an example. They'll get some of that. And people who go to the gym versus don't go to the gym, add 10 years and 20 years of doing that, you'll see there's a difference just in their apportment, how they look, their smiles, their visage, their face. Does it mean they'll have fewer wrinkles or not? They'll have probably to an extent, but it's something about the muscular structure of their body, how they carry themselves, and the quality of their skin as well. It's profound. So this is where that comes from. It's an indirect benefit of exercise, of hitting that threshold. You get these other things, and you get them in spades. So absolutely, you get them in spades. Interesting that some of the effects of high intensity training, which is getting to that threshold, you can also get with fasting. So at some point, fasting will also trigger HGH. It will also trigger autophagy. That is, your old mitochondria will fade away and die, which is a good thing. And so there's a lot of overlap with the benefits of fasting. And the journey's out, or there's no real research saying, well, do both at the same time and you get double the bang. No, but it's not bad to do both at the same time, as to the degree you could. You eventually do get tired when you do fasting for, many, many days at some point. But it's not like you shouldn't do this while you're working out. So those are some of the points that I wanted to make out to stretch out ahead of time, because the conversation I have with Dr. Ben is not linear. It's not linear. It's like holding a live wire. You can only be in one moment at one time, and then you have to drop it and see where it goes, and you pick it up again. We cover a lot of different things, and I will say up front, unfortunately, I lose my voice in the middle of the podcasts, and it comes back. So apart from that little messiness, but there's good information around that. So I don't know if we can cut that out or keep that in, because what was the conversation both before and after. That two things I want for you to understand is that he is of profound influence in the health industry relative to exercise, unlike anybody else. From looking back, unlike Mr. Jones, who invented, I want to say Andy Jones, but that's not his first name. Mr. Jones, who invented Nautilus. I mean, clearly that was a big difference, but it was from Dr. Ben experience of working with Mr. Jones while he was developing the Nautilus, and working with him did he develop the concept, and we go over this a little bit, of where he came for, well, wouldn't that make an isometric exercise almost the perfect exercise in the sense that it did not create any injury at all? And so the idea of going slow and having no momentum in your exercise at all minimizes really any chance of injury. You have correct form, and that's what it used to be called, but you have the correct form and you simply go slow. Hence, osteoporotic women could do this as well. They wouldn't be doing it, they would be doing it exactly the same way as bodybuilders. But the interesting thing is, a bodybuilder has so much muscle mass, we'll assume already, that he or she, they're already at that edge, they're already maxed out. And so they're going to have a harder time to advance forward. They're going to be tougher from initially. Whereas you take the osteoporotic woman, that they're just getting started. There's a lot of adaptation, and they will begin to, increase the resistance as you get better, and you increase the resistance as you get better, and on and on and on. So that person will be doing a lot of changes over time, whereas a bodybuilder who's already pretty well developed won't be doing a lot of changes. It will be an exhausting workout for him or her, and there will be changes, but they are pretty close to their maximum maybe. There's a point there. So there's a big variance, was the point of that conversation. The third thing I wanted to mention was that this is such a metabolic approach to exercise as well. You'll hear for Dr. Ben that he worked with plenty of medically referred people for cardiology, endocrinology, certainly obesity medicine, certainly in endocrinology would be the diabetes. Amazing. So it's really, if you ask me, been the silent corner of metabolic therapy for the longest time. The conversation in metabolic therapy conferences about exercise up to this point has only been along the lines of exogenous ketones will give you that extra little bang for your buck and you'll get stronger. And Jeff Volek had written a book about the art and science of athletic performance, low-carb athletic performance. And that's interesting. This is the whole thing about the metabolism and saying, yeah, it's about that, but it goes a lot deeper. Just very, very interesting. Let me see if I'm missing any points here. We get a little bit into some supplementation, just as general ideas would have no particular prescription. But I so hope that you follow the sometimes circuitous path of the conversation and extract some of the importance of it. You'll have links for where you can go to watch some of these very basic instructions. And actually, my hope is that you engage this. You really don't need equipment. You don't need somebody's permission to get started. It's that easy. Can you imagine doing 14 minutes twice a day? Only that. 14 minutes twice a day, only that as gym time or as exercise time. And the rest, go play tennis or something else, but you don't need any more because your body actually needs 48 hours to 60 hours to recuperate from a high intensity session. So it is easily life-changing. That is not an exaggeration to say that it's life-changing. I hope that you hear that and it's something that you fit in. And I hope that you get the nuanced difference in how I'm trying to approach this particular exercise in this keto context. This is as much keto as a ketogenic diet is, even though we haven't talked about ketones. We're talking about, the sensitivity, the increased insulin sensitivity. And no, we didn't go down to does your muscle become more keto sensitive as well. I would assume so, but that's a pretty high-end way, and that's probably going to be the next round of research. So with that, I just wanted this to be a small podcast before a two-parter of talking with Dr. Ben about this, so you understand, for one, where this information is. And he has a system, and his system is called the SMART system, S-M-A-R-T plan. And he has a book out that came out just about a year and a half ago. It was forwarded by Charles Barkley, and Charles Barkley was a big 76ers basketball player, Hall of Famer. And so he worked with people all over the place that right now, Dr. Ben is at least 70, I think just over 70. And his application for these exercises is all over the place, still, from athletes to those who are in need of medical help. And we just shouldn't avoid exercise because we think we're not up to it or don't want to go to the gym. It is something we all can do. We don't have to be a bodybuilder just to be serious about this. So I hope you'll take a listen. I hope you'll think about doing this, and all the resources should be there that you'll need. Okay? So till then, this is Dr. Goldkamp. Thanks for listening.